If LDL cholesterol is the problem in cardiovascular disease, why are so many people still dying? So, I'm here today to talk about the LDL cholesterol myth and how LDL cholesterol has been vilified. And, if you treat your LDL cholesterol, you won't get a heart attack, you won't get cardiovascular disease. So, I want to start off by first talking about first diagnosis of cardiovascular disease and how it was pinned on saturated fat, pinned on cholesterol, when really what was going on behind the scenes was it was tied to the start of smoking and tied to the creation of a toxic food environment. So I have a couple things that I want to talk about when it comes to these two topics. First, the 20th century tobacco peak. It was at the beginning of the 20th century, from about 1900 to about 1965. The smoking prevalence peaked at about 42% in 1965. And during this period, cardiovascular disease or coronary artery disease, particularly, that incidence skyrocketed as tobacco became the social norm. At the same time, we had the rise of ultra processed foods. And ultra processed foods really came about in the 1960s or so. And, things like Crisco and things like these corn and safflower and sunflower oils, otherwise known as seed oils, came about. And food was filled with preservatives and emulsifiers and all sorts of things, all sorts of chemicals that are not seen in nature. And these two things together really are what led to the advent of cardiovascular disease or coronary artery disease becoming the number one killer in America and around the world globally a few decades behind us. So the one thing you have to know about both smoking and ultra-processed foods is that each one individually carries a risk factor, but when you take these two things and put them together, that risk factor is magnified, it's multiplied. So if you have 3 times more likely risk of, say, cancer or heart disease from smoking, and you have a 3 times greater risk from ultra-processed foods, you actually have a 9 times more likelihood of cardiovascular disease or cancer when you're combining those two things together. They're not additive, they're multiplicative. I think that's the word. They multiply each other. So it's 3 times 3, not 3 plus 3. So that's the first thing. And, if we've known for many, many years that LDL cholesterol is the so-called culprit, and we've done things to manage and reduce that LDL cholesterol or even total cholesterol, then where are we as far as cardiovascular disease? Has it gone away? Has the incidence decreased? Is it getting so much better it's like absolutely unheard of? No, the answer is it continues to skyrocket. It continues to increase in incidence, and more people every single year dying from heart attacks and coronary artery disease. So I wanted to mention a video that I watched this morning that was just terrific. If you've never heard of Dr. Ovadia, I highly recommend his content. He's a cardiovascular surgeon. He does heart surgery. He puts in stents. He does bypass surgery. He does all these things. And he was talking about how he notices people who have low LDL cholesterol still having cardiovascular disease, people that have high LDL cholesterol not getting progression of their cardiovascular disease. And of course, he's seeing them if they have cardiovascular disease, but it's not progressing. And he talked about this one particular case where the person's LDL cholesterol was 29. That's super duper duper low. And yet they still were having coronary artery disease progression. They actually were in the hospital, had suffered a heart attack. So, and then he went back and he looked even a year prior, and that person was in the 40s or 50s. Their LDL cholesterol was nice and low. So if, the statin drugs and other things will reduce that LDL cholesterol, Well, why are people still dropping dead of heart attacks? Why are people still developing coronary artery disease and cardiovascular disease? Should, like sometimes common sense is not so common. You've got to realize that if you've thought LDL cholesterol is the main driver of cardiovascular disease up to this point, and you've had 50 years with the statin drugs to lower those, and it's the number one most prescribed drug on the planet. So if that's the case, then cardiovascular disease should have been wiped out a long, long time ago. However, it continues to be on the rise. So it can't be LDL that's the ultimate issue. It can't be total cholesterol that's the ultimate issue. It has to be something else. And we'll talk about what that something else is in a minute. So let's talk a little bit about LDL and what it is, though. So, like, particularly people that eat a lot of saturated fats, like my keto friends, my carnivore community folks, LDL cholesterol is a carrier for triglycerides and fats. So, if you're eating a very high fat diet, low carbohydrate diet, so whether you're doing low carb, keto, or carnivore, particularly the last two, then of course your LDL cholesterol is going to go up. Fats cannot dissolve in water. You probably know this from cooking, right? You put a drop of oil in a big pot of water and it sits there. It doesn't dissolve into the water. So if fat doesn't dissolve in water and blood is primarily water, then we need to have a carrier to bring that fat to the various areas of the body. So LDL cholesterol is basically the taxi cab or the boat or the airplane or the car that drives the fat around the body. So like, for instance, I'm a carnivore. I eat only animal products. Carnivore is no carbohydrates and very little basically it's just animal protein only. Keto, you might add a little bit of vegetable matter in there, but carnivore, there's no fruits, no vegetables, only meat and animal products like eggs and butter and dairy and things like that. So if your primary source of energy is fat, then it makes perfect sense for your LDL cholesterol and your total cholesterol to go up, because that fat has to get to the various areas of your body to provide energy. And the only way that it can do that is in a carrier, because it can't dissolve in water. So we've got to stop looking at LDL as this really bad player, this quote unquote bad cholesterol. And it's not just the amount of LDL cholesterol that matters. So the most important thing that no one talks about, including your physicians typically, is the quality of the LDL.